Okay, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, we'll resume this meeting. We'll come out of recess. As I announced before the recess, we will go to the protests on package 2 retail, and the people who approached the microphone and chose to comment and speak on protests on package 1 seem to go pretty balanced, but let's just add a little bit more structure if you don't mind, members. What I'd like to add is that we give 5 minutes to what appears to be the 3 parties involved in package 2 at this time relevant to the protests. Host is one of them, HDS Partners is another one, and LAX Retail Magic is another one. We'll give each one of them 5 minutes to speak on behalf of their party. Each one of them 5 minutes. So let me just give another 30 seconds for everybody to gather their notes and to decide who their speakers are going to be on package 2. And again, it is not a requirement that they take up the whole 5 minutes. It's allowed, and it's welcome if people want to do so. In addition to that, it's not a requirement that they, that each party come and speak. I just want to make for the record, it is their opportunity to do so. Okay, so if we have someone ready to speak on package number 2, we're on the protest of package number 2, retail. And please state your name and which party you are speaking on behalf of.
Hi, Philip Tate with Shepard Mullen, representing Host International. Good public contracting is like good science. You should be able to replicate the results no matter whose laboratory you're in. And that's just simply not the case with these RFPs. One thing that I do want to clarify is I honestly didn't follow the details of who kept which notes, retained which notes, but I just want to clarify for you, we submitted a CPRA request. In response to that CPRA request, we got notes back from one person. It was about 2 or 3 pages, very general, and I don't even know that they were specific to a package. In our mind, it's very hard to understand how you go through this process with 10 separate packages, an average of 5 or so proposers per package, dozens of criteria, hundreds of pages per proposal, and the permutations of the results are endless. And it's difficult to understand how you do that all from memory. As a result of that, there wasn't much transparency in this process. It's hard for us to distill how it is that people with these very subjective scoring criteria ended at the results that they ended at. So despite the lack of transparency in this process, we did find some irregularities in the limited comments and limited notes that were there. For instance, when Host proposed the E-News brand, one of the panel members wrote on their comment sheet, "Brand is not strong enough for LAX." However, when Hudson proposed the same brand in another package, they received a perfect score. I don't know what their score should have been. What I do know is it's difficult to understand how they received a perfect score on that package with a brand that the scoring panel member decided was not strong enough for LAX. And that was the same panel member scoring on both occasions. It wasn't one panel member thought it was strong enough, one didn't. It was the same person changed their mind about this brand, apparently, between packages and between proposers. It's instances like this that gave us the impression that they were scoring the student and not scoring the test results. To add to the confusion of how they did the scoring, we've learned that LAWA did not conduct the reference checks. Despite there being a references criterion and despite there being a requirement in the RFP that you submit references and that they would go check them, they didn't do that until the scoring was complete. So they didn't have the reference checks in front of them when they did the scoring. And that's a bit in contradiction to what you were told on Retail Package 1, that they didn't consider any additional information after the fact. They must have, because they didn't have this information at the time they did the scoring. Despite that, Arias in Retail Package 1 and Hudson in Retail Package 2 received perfect scores on their references. When they finally did the reference checks, both of them had negative references. Again, I don't know what their scores should have been, but it's difficult to understand how they got perfect scores in those categories when the criterion was references from landlords. They didn't have that information in front of them when they got their perfect score, and when they got the information, part of it was negative. These are the reasons why, for us, the scoring as a whole was inexplicable. It doesn't make sense. It's like a construction wall was put up in front of this process, and all we have are the small holes to peer into. Each time we peer through a hole, be it the 1090 accusations, be it the scoring irregularities, we see something flawed in the process. Yet when we back away from the wall, LAWA is asking you to believe, don't worry about it. The totality of it is perfect, even though every bit that you can see is flawed. That's why we've asked you to reject the proposals and start fresh. Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Rosendahl, you had a question, then Ms. Hahn?
I would like to see if LAWA could respond to what we just heard from that protest. So my brain can get it in the same context, not an hour later kind of thing.
And just even on the the references, under what category would that have been under? Was that experience and qualifications?
There were varying levels of reference checks. I'm going to ask Steve to speak to the references that were included as part of the proposals, and then I can speak to the reference checks that were done after the scoring was done and the recommendations were made.
I'd love to hear those answers. Thank you.
Two comments. Steve Martin.
Yeah.
In the scoring, there's a category called experience and qualifications, and it has sub-bullets, which includes references from landlords was the particular thing. In the proposals that were submitted, virtually everybody included letters of reference from the airports where they do business elsewhere. And so that was, as someone on the panel, that's what I relied on. I read the proposals and looked at the letters of references and looked where they came from, and applying that sub-part of experience and qualifications to the scoring. So in the proposals themselves, there were letters of reference from other airports, basically.
Well, were those references checked on before the final scoring or not?
No, they were not checked on before the final scoring. The evaluation panel did their scoring and made their recommendation.
But part of the bullet points that I'm looking at based on the table that I'm assuming that the scoring panel had was, for example, bullet point 4 down on experience and qualification says bullet point references from landlords, and that inclusive can add up to as much as 10 points.
Right, so those were references that were included in the proposal, and because of the fact that all of the references were not checked before the evaluation panel concluded their scoring, we pulled the evaluation panel back together once all of the references for the recommended proposers were independently verified.
Now, wait a minute. Hold on, Gina Marie.
Yeah.
You're saying that whose references were checked after the initial scoring was finished? Was it only the ones that were recommended to win, or was it they checked all the reference of all of them anyway?
Initially, we only checked the references for the proposers that were recommended as prevailing in each individual package. And we pulled the evaluation panel back together, shared the information that we had gotten. Each panel member determined whether it would have made any difference in their scoring, and each came back and said, no, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. Then, subsequent to that, just to be sure that we were thorough enough, we checked the references for every proposer, for every package, and we got independent verification of those as well.
But this is after the scoring. Now, you're saying...
That was after the scoring, yes.
Are you conveying a message to this board that the references that were provided and that LAWA intended to check, no matter what, eventually got checked, but after the scoring panel had scored the proposers.
Yes.
That is normal custom and practice, or was that something that happened and people said, well, wait a minute, let's go back and check the references after the fact, oops, or was it done purposefully?
It was not done purposefully. I think it's probably better if it's done before the evaluation panel has finished their scoring. It wasn't done for the winning proposers before the scoring was completed, so we did it after the fact, and we reconvened the panel.
Hold on a second.
So they had all of the information they would have otherwise had.
Gina Marie, but the thing is, I would only assume that before an individual or a panel puts forth their scores, they would have the relevant information that is pertinent to scoring. For example, because it says right here, references from landlords is part of some of the point scores, and somebody just mentioned that even though references hadn't been checked yet, there were some perfect scores given in that category, and yet the references hadn't been checked. So to give a perfect score when relevant information had not been checked seems a bit flawed or a bit backwards.
There were references that were part of the proposal submittals. The evaluation panel made their scoring recommendations on those references that were part of the submittals. Subsequent to the scoring, we also did an independent verification of the references that were cited in the proposals for independent verification. We then brought those independent verifications to the panelists, asked them if it would have made any difference. Would they adjust their scoring in any way? And the answer was no.
But wait a minute. You're saying two things when it comes to references. You're saying that there were references that were included with the proposals, by the proposers,
Yes.
correct? Now, all of those were checked before the scoring had been
Those were
finished?
simply reviewed as a part of the proposal review process.
Okay, hold on. Now, let's get more specific, Gina Marie. They gave references. So basically, the panelists saw the references for what they were told they were before scoring, before they actually checked the reference, double-checked the references, as in verifying those references?
In scoring, as a member of the panel, there are letters in the proposal, let's say from Miami Airport or Atlanta Airport or Washington, D.C., or for the incumbents, they work at our airport already. And so between the work they do at the airport, at our airports, and the letters that they got out of other airports, written documents on letterhead, that was what I used to do my scoring for references by landlords. I considered a letter from Washington National Airport or from Atlanta Airport a reference from a landlord for the purposes of assigning points in this category. That it was checked again after there was a nominee from the evaluation committee is a separate thing not related to my scoring. So the letters from landlords in the proposal met my test to fill out this thing of experience and qualifications that says references from landlords.
I think we should be clear as well that that recognitions, awards, favorable reviews, whatever they elected to include in their package was also part of what the evaluation panel reviewed,
Yeah.
at least.
But, so basically, before you scored, you just took their word for it. Because with all due respect, was it, for example, Atlanta Airport sent that letter unsolicited by the proposer, or was it the proposer who solicited that letter from Atlanta Airport, for example, and then included it in their package?
I don't know how they procured their letters.
Come on, Mark. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll say it differently. The references, such as you just pulled a name out of the air, and, it's not specific, but using it as an example, say there was a letter that was before you from Atlanta Airport, basically saying that XYZ company is doing a fine job at Atlanta Airport. That letter, for the purposes that we're talking about right now, that letter was submitted by the proposer, or it was sent to LAWA independent of that proposer, and then you looked at it. Now do you understand my question?
It's submitted by the proposer in the proposal book.
Exactly. So now, is it fair to believe that if somebody's doing business, say, at Atlanta Airport, and they asked Atlanta Airport for a letter, and that letter was not very nice about their experiences there, would they have included that letter in that proposal? It was up to the choice of the proposer to look good, correct? So if there was a letter that they retrieved from one of the airports that they're doing business in, and it wasn't very pretty, wasn't very flattering, wasn't very complimentary, it's not very likely that they would submit that letter with their proposal. Well, let me ask you a better question, rather than hypothetical. Were there any letters that were submitted in any of the proposals that you reviewed, and that, for that matter, I would ask that question to other people if they were sitting before me, but since you're sitting there, Mr. Martin, and you were one of the evaluators, were there any letters in there that were not flattering?
There were letters that were not compelling. I would not say there were letters that were not flattering. There were letters that were not compelling either by virtue of the words used or the person who signed it. And I, in looking at those letters, looked at the content of the letters and the rank of the person at the airport that it came from in giving weight to how valid the reference was. No, there were no letters that were negative references.
Okay.
But the content of the letter will tell you in somewhat whether the reference is, strongly held or filling in a blank.
So, therefore, for scoring purposes, at that point in your process, you took those letters at face value and made your own deliberations rather than checking with the sources of those letters, of which you did check with those sources, LAWA in general checked with the sources of those letters after the fact of the scoring.
I can't say that the reference checks afterwards were based on the same people that submitted the letters in the proposals. The reference checks afterwards were made of the cited references that were supposed to be used for independent verification. I don't have personal knowledge that they are the same as the letters that were in the proposals, if there were letters in the proposals. Do you understand the distinction I'm trying to make?
Yes, I understand the distinction, but the thing that I'm having a hard time understanding is why we would go through this process that took over 2 years before it got to this board, and that we would use a method that is less than usual to check references, but after the fact of scoring, when those references are part of the scoring process. It would be different if it said, look, this is extra credit, and then you checked them. But the thing is, those references were part of the scoring process. And in fact, unless the person, one of the people that just spoke right now, they claimed that there were some perfect scores in this category, yet references were not checked directly
But the
prior to
references
that
were
perfect
checked.
score. What's that?
What I would offer is that the references were checked.
Eventually,
and
after
yes,
scoring?
Yes, and the evaluation panel was pulled back together, so that if there would have been any adjustments based on the independently verified reference information, they would have made those adjustments to their scoring.
So, and I'm not saying this tongue-in-cheek, the process got lucky, because there were no changes in scores after directly checking those references. Because if
There was
after
no
directly
change in
checking
score.
those references, if you would have changed some scores, then that perhaps might point to a bit of a flaw in the process, at least up to that point. No? You choose not to...
Perhaps. I would look at it as if the entire process included once you look at the process in its entirety, it included all the independent reference verification, I would say that was fine. Would it have been ideal to have had that before? Would have been more efficient?
I find it unusual. Forget about efficient. I find it unusual that references, especially when we're looking at an accumulation of packages, a few million here, a few million there, over $100 million worth of retail activity that is in LAWA's purview, that we would leave that process that open, especially when the references from landlords are part of the scoring. If it wasn't part of the scoring, I wouldn't be bothering you with this discussion, trust me. That would be extra credit, a sideshow, completely separate.
The references are one of several elements that are part of that
Absolutely.
criterion.
And in order to get a perfect score on anything, I would imagine, forget about imagine, in order to get a perfect score on anything, I would think it would be relevant that all pertinent information be present before a score is given, rather than give a score and then later on see to it that that information is checked.
That would be better.
Mr. Rosendahl, did you have a question? You stood up.
If you heard that protest, if you had any reaction to it as well.
No, I mean, there's no facts here that are different. There's no facts that are different than the facts that we considered in June, and our response is on page 18 of the letter. So we have nothing more to add to that.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure we have a clear understanding among ourselves of what people are saying and a reaction back. Thanks.
Excuse me, to the gentleman standing at the podium, are you with host?
Yes, we're with
They left a little bit of time. Madam Clerk, how much time was it? 1 minute?
We had about 45 seconds.
Okay, if you want to say something within those 45 seconds, please do, in the interest of process.
We are attempting to add both clarity to the process and understanding the scoring irregularities, and the reference issue is exactly that. In this instance, the references that Mr. Martin spoke about were not required by the RFP. They were, in effect, accolades provided as part of a package just to bolster how people feel about generally the package. The only thing that was required by the RFP were specific references for landlords which were available for reference checks. The scoring that was done based upon the accolades perhaps provided perfect scores in this instance for Hudson and in package 1 for Arias. When those references were then checked, negative references came back. That did not adjust the scoring, as Ms. Lindsay has indicated. So that is the exact part or criteria of the RFP. And when references came back and the panel got back together, they did not adjust the score, even though there were negative references.
Thank you. Your name for the record again?
Jerry Newman.
Thank you. To that point, okay, Gina Marie, you kept saying over and over, you kept saying over and over that after those references were checked, and we're talking specifically about landlords now, you kept saying that nothing came back that caused the panel to change any scores. Were there any negative results uncovered by checking of those landlord references?
There were a couple of ambivalent comments, I think, and to be specific about those, we'd need to go back.
Who would know? Mr. Martin, would you know
remember.
about those ambivalent comments?
Let's see. So the feedback on that would be where? Okay,
Is Ms. Shaw
here's
here?
one comment.
Excuse me, is Amy Shaw here?
Yes,
Amy, are
she's
you?
here. I've got the documentation.
Okay, hold on. Are you privy to what we're talking about right here? Could you come forward, please?
There was one comment from one airport about Hudson Group, said there were delays that could clearly be attributed to Hudson. However, we finally settled on a negotiated number of approximately 80 days at $1,000 in financial penalties per day. So that would be one of those comments that would say, was there a problem with a construction schedule somewhere? Now, there are all sorts of reasons for construction schedule delays. There were, I think, discussions between our staff and the airport staff because these were done with independent phone call verifications. And there was nothing in the background story that caused a great problem. There is no question, really, whether Hudson is qualified to do this work. We think they are, and there was nothing we found in the reference checks that gave anybody any significant pause. Do you have anything
Ms.
to
Shaw,
add to that,
can
Amy?
you please come forward? Were you the one that was checking references, or were you involved in compiling the checking of the references, or what would be your relevant recollection to this matter? Go ahead, it's on. It's automatically on.
They'll activate it.
Yes. The notes that Ms. Lindsay is reading from are from the notes that we took on the reference checks.
And so that's the only reference check that you recollect that was done after the scoring fact that seemed to be something that was less than positive?
No, there was a...
She needs it.
Take your time. We're not going to reconvene this board a million times, so we have to take our time, make sure we get it as accurately as possible. Thank you.
There was one reference about Arias in Indianapolis Airport. Yes. Stating that not all locations were completed per the authority's guidelines. Only two.
Could you pull the microphone a little closer to you? Thank you.
Only 2 of the 8 locations are meeting sales projections, and when I followed up on that comment, he said that all locations opened in November, but that he could not report that all the units were fully constructed as there were minor punch list items. So even though the store was open and there were minor punch list items, they did not consider those stores to be fully complete. He said that the sales projections were developed prior to September of 2008, and due to the economy, overall sales of all concessionaires are less than expected. And then Mr. Weiss, who was the respondent from Indianapolis Airport, further stated that he did not answer the customer service question because there's always room for improvement, and he will only report on customer service satisfaction based on official surveys and mystery shopper programs which had not yet been conducted. So that was one of the follow-ups that we did.
Are we still on just package 2? Retail package 2, or were you looking at
It's
all
just
of them?
Arias in general.
Arias in general.
Arias in general.
Okay.
And then in Metropolitan Nashville Airport, on Host, there were delays that could be attributed to Host. However, we finally settled on a negotiated number of 80-plus days at $1,000 in financial penalties per day. Host proposal assumed a 3.5% annual increase in employments in the downturn in economy, and subsequent employments has prevented B&A from realizing the conservative growth. And then in follow-up with Rebecca Ramsey, who stated that B&A's new agreement is very stringent, although B&A did not contribute to the delay. For example, providing base building drawings that were not accurate. The concessionaire was also responsible for late submittals, which delayed completion of construction. B&A decided they would assess monetary penalties to remind concessionaires that they must comply with all provisions of the new agreement, but they did negotiate and reduce the amount of monetary penalties. And it's the same assessment for Hudson from Indianapolis.
Okay. So, based on that, those facts that were uncovered after the initial scoring, so the bottom line is, on those particular matters, the scoring was not adjusted. Whether they got a perfect score before that was uncovered or not, the bottom line is there were no adjustments after references were checked after scoring, in any case, in any package, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions from the members?
Right. Do you think going forward you would probably work towards having reference checks before the scoring process took place?
Yes, ma'am.
Because just reading Lawa's response to this, I thought it was a little, I don't know, and see how it served our purpose. It says, finally in section 3.4, selection process, the RFP stated that references provided by the RFP respondents will be contacted for reference checks, but did not specify when the reference checks would be initiated by LAWA. And contrary to Host's opinion, nothing in the RFP mandated LAWA to conduct reference checks prior to the optional oral interview process.
Which is accurate, but if what you're suggesting is it would be better to do it before, I agree completely.
Right. Okay.
And who wrote that response?
City Attorney?
No, I mean, who's the author of that document? Not just the city attorney's office in general, but who wrote that response?
Which specific attorney, I don't know. I don't know if you recall.
Does anybody know
or
from the
not.
city attorney's office?
I signed the letter, but it was a group effort.
Oh, it was a group effort? Okay,
Yes.
but it was your signature?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my question. Satisfies my question. Any other questions from the board members? Okay. We heard from one of the organizations that was involved in the protest. Next, who would like to come up next, we also have on Retail Package 2, we want to make sure that the opportunity is afforded at least to HDS Partners and or LAX Retail Magic. Yes.
Hi, Lisa Britzner representing HDS, and I apologize that they're not here today because I don't think they were aware that we were going to be taking up the protests. I'm representing HDS Retail, Team LA, which is AEG, Concourse Concessions, Betty Dixon, who's a longtime DBE operating at LAX, and Martha Vasquez from Olveritas Village from Olvera Street, the birthplace of Los Angeles. You guys have really hit on a lot of the issues that we raised in our protest today. Councilmember Parks talked about maintaining the status quo with a mix of retailers that have been rated as 19th out of 20 by J.D. Powers and Associates surveys. The mix of brands may change slightly, but the retail outlets will be run by the same operator who has overseen the decline at LAX over the past few years. You've also talked extensively about the unexplained and unexplainable scoring, which did impact the ratings of the proposers. And I'll give you a specific example in our case. The Lakers, Dodgers, USC, UCLA, and Olvera Street, maybe you've heard of these, we received a score of 15 out of 30 and a comment not representative of Los Angeles. While the Hudson Magic retail proposer received a 30 out of 30 for a very similar mix of brands, including a comparison between Billabong and Rip Curl for a beach lifestyles representation. Similarly, in experience ratings, the incumbent, Hudson, whose named partner, the Magic joint venture, has 0 airport experience, received a perfect score for experience. And in addition, the incumbent, Hudson, who was reprimanded by the Board of Airport Commissioners as recently as 2007 for poor treatment of its minority subtenants, yet again, they received a perfect score for experience. And so whether or not the references were checked externally, there were probably some internal references from LAWA that should also have been checked. I also wanted to address the issue of arbitrary financial scoring. In our case, the worldwide financials from some of our competitors were compared against our North American financials. HDS Retail is one of the largest retailers in the world and operates in several countries, 18 countries and 30 airports across the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean. And yet we received lower scores because they used our North American operations versus international operations. I also wanted to address a comment by Mr. Martin regarding the fact that financials were not required. It's my understanding that if you vote to support the staff recommendation on Package 2, the City Attorney has directed you to waive the financials of the JV partner Magic Johnson Enterprises as part of your consideration. Basically, I believe this comes down to a fundamental flaw. There is no objective record upon which to make these decisions. And that seems to be based on a lack of space in comment boxes. Whatever the reason, as Hudson's own lawyer has urged you to do, exercise your own judgment and acknowledge that this process is fatally flawed. Direct LAWA to redo this RFP in a fair and equitable manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gritzner, just want to let you know you did leave a little bit of time. We're not going to call you back, so think very well if you have anything else to say. Just in the interest of fairness, the last...
If it's not covered, my attorney is here too. They can speak on their behalf.
No, but unless one of the board members calls somebody up, you will have met your time element.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosendahl.
Mr. Chair, I'd love for both LAWA and city attorneys to respond to what that comment was just now. If you have anything to say about it.
I think the comment about not using financials, I think, was mischaracterized. What we did not require is financials for subtenants. We required financials from the proposer or the guarantor behind the proposer, and whatever financial information they provided, that's what we used.
How about this 15 versus the 30 that she also mentioned?
I don't know how the individual scorers arrived at their numbers.
Reed, do you want to add?
I don't know. I didn't understand what she was referencing.
Could we ask you to ask that again, just so we can understand the reference?
You're welcome to do so. Members of
Please,
the board
yeah,
can ask somebody to come up and clarify
Clear.
something. It's your prerogative.
Sure. Thank you.
There's two forms that we received. One is this scoring that is the compiled matrix of all the scoring, and then the other were the little rating sheets that the individual raters had. In our particular case, across the categories, they had scores for each of the things upon which you were scored. So one of them was on an LAX or an LA field, and we received 15. One of the raters put 15 out of 30, and then the comment was not representative of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And our competitor, for the same mix of brands, received 30 out of 30 by that same rater. So just trying to understand, again, I think Ms. Hahn put it best, which is we don't have any reason to understand why that particular person felt that the Lakers and the Dodgers were representative of Los Angeles and the Hudson Magic proposal and not representative of Los Angeles under our proposal. And so I think we're struggling with the same issues that you're struggling with, which is it's just nobody's showing the math. And it was very difficult for us to understand that.
Thank you. Could you respond to that directly? What you
Yes,
just said?
I will, and then I'll ask Steve if he has anything to add to that. I think we have heard a couple of times some consternation about certain scores that were given in one situation for a particular set of concepts or a concept in general, and then a different set of scores that was given under a different set of circumstances. I think it's important to recognize that part of the evaluation panel's charge was to determine the appropriateness of the various subconcepts for the spaces that were involved in each individual package. It is entirely possible that a particular concept would have been good in space A, but not very good in space B, either because it was a different terminal with a different set of airlines and a different demographic, or because the surrounding
I don't think that's what she was alluding to. I think it was, why would their proposal for Dodgers, Lakers, SC, what was the other one?
I think that will...
there was 15 out of 30, and the comment being, one of the few comments that we got was not reflective of Los Angeles.
I was not that scorer, so I can't explain that. I can tell you that there were 8 different stores involved in package number 2. It may be, and I don't recall, that one of the stores had a sports theme that had all those names in it. The rater who decided to give HDS 15 points did that on their own, and that's just one person scoring. I was not the rater. I can't explain it.
Just for clarification, Mr. Martin's talking about a rater, as in rating, not raiders, as in the football team. Just for talking
Sorry.
But as you can see, obviously, 15 points is a lot, 15 out of 30, and even though the rankings were what you use, the rankings were based on the points, and that's a big issue there.
Just to clarify how the scoring was done that led to the rankings.
Yeah.
At the end of the interview process, each individual went off and scored on their own. We did not have a group scoring session, and so that's why I can't tell you why an individual made certain decisions. I can only tell you what I did.
I think the other thing we need to be clear about are that there are sub-bullets within each individual criterion, and I believe what Ms. Gritzner is identifying is one particular aspect of a fairly broad set of things that need to be considered under each individual criterion. I mean, there's a bunch of different things that determine the acceptability or advisability of an overall mix of brands and concepts.
True, but I think that the point spread is so thin between, the first and second that really made the difference.
This, I think, is package 2, and I think the point difference is different.
Oh, this is package 2, okay.
And may I add, this, let's say the person who gave HDS 15 was a harsh scorer. That's part of the reason that we adopted the conversion of scores to rank, so if that person gave one party, 30 and one party 15, they could still be ranked 1 and 2, even though the difference was great. So focusing on the scores is not as helpful as focusing on the rank. And the rank is the product of all the scores. And so whether somebody took a lot of points off or took just 1 point off, the rank is what counted in the way the recommendation was aggregated.
But you can't really separate the rank from the score. Because the score...
Not completely.
Score is what contributes to the rank, anyway.
But I have a question, Mr. Martin. You just made a point, but the fact of the matter is the highest scoring segment on the point scores, we have 30 points in one segment, 25 points in another segment, 20 points in another segment, 15 points in another segment, and 10 points in a segment. 30 was the highest segment for people to shine. Just looking at weighting, and we've talked about weighting a lot today, if somebody is given a 15 from one of the scorers, very likely that much weight, if that scorer perhaps gave somebody 30 points, that in and of itself, just in one package, would very likely weight heavy enough to where the chance of that package getting ranked eventually and put forth as a number 1 ranked is very slim. Isn't that much weight based on the 30-point category? Couldn't it have that much of an impact?
The 30-point category obviously is worth more weight than some of the other categories that may be 10, and the fact that that party lost 15 of those 30 points does increase the probability their rank would be low.
Or it certainly would even diminish their chance of being ranked number 1 overall.
Yes. Yes.
Just by 15 out of 30 from one scorer.
Yes.
That's how much weight that has, correct?
That was a very important category.
But what's really seems to be awkward is that we're hearing from somebody in the form of a protest explain that with some of the same sub-vendors in a very subjective category such as overall mix of brands / concepts. That's a little bit more subjective perhaps than financials.
Yes.
You're in the red or you're in the black, but on this one, much more subjective, flavoring and things of that nature. That with many of the sub-vendors being the same, and with all due respect, names like Lakers, Dodgers, Alvera Street, that's about as LA as motherhood and apple pie is to this country. So for somebody to be able to package those home-identified LA brands, be it sports mostly, for them to get a 15 out of 30 just strikes me as very awkward. But if I had more notes to go on, and if I could actually see more of what happened in the process, maybe I could be easier convinced that, oh, I see the thread there. I see where they blew it, or I see where there was a glaring difference. Like Gina Marie Lindsay, you just mentioned earlier that, well, perhaps it was they put those organizations together in a different package for a different terminal or what have you. But at this moment in time, I haven't received clarity that those similarities did in fact vary, and they are not relevant to the same terminal or not.
For the same package, and maybe it will be instructive for everybody, if I just list the sub-concepts, since what we're talking about here is the concept criterion, for the package that staff is recommending, which is LAX Retail Magic 2 JV, we have Hudson Booksellers, Froman's, Kids Corner, Papyrus Entertainment Weekly, Rip Curl, Mattel Experience, Magic Johnson Sports, Kitson, Hugo Boss, and E! Entertainment. The protester has these concepts: Watermark by CCI, LA Youth News, iStore, Beach Culture, Skechers, Raw Style, Team LA, USAT Store. So those are the concepts that were being evaluated between those two proposers by the evaluation committee.
On package 2.
On package 2.
Okay. Any other questions, members? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just, again, a procedural question for the chair as well as for the panelists there. those who were recommended, especially right now we're talking about package number 2, is there an opportunity for them to come up and explain who they are rather than just the protesters and where they're coming from, so that we get, my old television days, I used to have all points of views there. And so I'd love to hear those that were awarded it, their reaction to the protesters as well as to the colleagues here, so we get the richness of their particular position. Can we do that?
Mr. Rosendahl, they've been, as I announced, that they're afforded that opportunity so they can exercise their right to do so.
Great.
I'm not their attorney. I don't go around speaking for them, but they have the right to do so. And as we close out this, the protest comments that were just made, we're going to go to them having that opportunity.
Very good.
Okay.
Great. Because, they're the ones who can defend themselves.
Seeing no more questions from the board members so far, now go ahead. You may proceed. Please state your name for the record. You do get 5 minutes.
Okay, good
And then
afternoon.
if you
Good
can't,
afternoon again.
excuse me, and just in the interest of fairness so people understand what we're doing here, if you are asked by one of the board members to come and answer some questions after your 5 minutes, obviously you're welcome to do so at the request of a board member beyond your 5 minutes. So you have 5 minutes on your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. I'm Dale Mason Cochran. I'm here with the team Hudson Magic Concourse Ventures. And to the point of the issue of having one company or one entity bid on all 4 packages or getting 4 packages, I think the beauty of our package, particularly for package 2, is that we brought an exciting, diverse mix of local brands. We have Magic Johnson Sports, yes, but we have a partnership, joint venture partnership with Corinne Zaman from the Zaman Group. We also have partnerships with Rip Curl, Mattel Toys, Hugo Boss, Vrooman's Bookstore in Pasadena. We brought to the table a wide array of local brands. Also, to the point of our package 1, we have the subtenant Soto and Sanchez. So, although it looks like it's one company for all bids, we indeed have different teams, different partners, different brands and concepts for each of the packages. Go ahead.
Please.
And just to add to the comments made by the protester, I think in this particular procurement, the minimum MAG that was available to be offered, I think this particular company, HDS, bid the minimum $1,584,000, and I'll be corrected by staff if I'm off base there. But also, I think it's important, as we look at the ACDBE components, in this case, again, the Saman Group, a local entrepreneur, recently selected as your LAX Retailer of the Year. The ACDBE component are really twofold committee. Certification is one component. You could be certified by a state agency. Capacity to perform, I can receive a certification from the state of California, and no one has evaluated whether or not I can perform. So the performance and the capacity to perform has to be done at the staff or the airport level, because that is a requirement of 49 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, Parts 23 and Part 26. It's 2 components. Even in Package 1, where the staff responded, certification is one component, capacity to perform, and if the ACDBE is not evaluated on its capacity to perform, then the prime, in essence, upon default, could take over that space. So the DBE regulations requires the entity to do an analysis so that the DBE can stand on its own and have proof that they're not being backed solely by the prime. And that is very clear in the regulation. Counsel?
Ben Resnick again at the microphone. So continuing on retail package number 2, which is being recommended for the Magic Johnson Concourse and Hudson joint venture group. I want to point out that what's interesting in this protest is the number 2, number 3 on package 2 were Arias and Parodies. Neither one of them filed a protest. So the only protest before you is number 4 and number 5. for the second to last and the last. Oftentimes, the Board of Airport Commissioners would not even hear those protests because you have a rule that basically says unless your protest can lead to your winning, we don't need to listen to it. So if Host and HDS protest prevails, and technically the next in line is Arias and Parodies, neither one of which filed a protest. Now, with respect to, so for one thing, if this was the Board of Airport Commissioners, chances are they wouldn't even have an audience. However, as to the Arias concern, Arias has stood up before you at the last hearing, today again, making references to Atlanta and how they have done better than Hudson. We submitted on Friday, and I apologize for it being late because we had to get the numbers from Atlanta Airport. We submitted the numbers to you on Friday in a letter that was emailed, and I have hard copies of to distribute here, that lays out exactly what space they took over that Hudson formerly had and how they've actually lost money on that space, not made money on that space, and I have that for you here today. So that with respect to Arias and with respect to any concern on Retail Package 2, it has been awarded by a wide margin to the Hudson Magic team. Unlike the first protest on Retail Package 1, which was a razor-thin margin, this one, in fact, was by a wide margin because Hudson got all #1 rankings from all 5 evaluators on Retail Package 2. Not a single one of the protesters or Arias or anyone else got a ranking of #1. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could follow up with the lady that spoke first. You mentioned local groups that are partners with you.
Yes.
Now, is this window dressing, or are they equity partners, and are they going to get a piece of the action, or is it just show dog stuff?
I can tell you without a doubt that we have certified, validated partners who will be operating their own stores. We know the Sanchez, Soto and Sanchez, they're operating their stores. We know that I'm an equity partner, Karim Zaman, operating his own store. So we have partners that are operating their own stores.
And in this case, Magic Johnson and Dale Mason Cochran are equity partners. They're not DBEs.
Right.
Hudson gave up equity to these local entrepreneurs.
And that's what I wanted to hear.
I'm sorry.
Is this for real or what?
No. It's for real. I think it is unprecedented anywhere else in the country that we have a prime who goes in, offers up equity ownership of a prime contract to minority companies, and that we would be a part of it.
Would you mention them again, just for my brain? Which were the minority partners?
The minority partners for equity ownership?
Yeah.
Magic Johnson Enterprises and myself, Dale Mason Cochran with Concourse Ventures. We're the 2 equity partners.
And the DBE is Karim Zaman.
Karim Zaman.
Could you comment on this?
Sure. I'm an ACDBE partner with Hudson. I've operated a store, I'm for real, I've operated a store in Terminal 7 since June 2009. I was actually received an honor by the mayor's office and in council chambers here as Minority Retail Firm of the Year for where we brought the store from prior to my involvement in the store to a very large increase in the store after its first year. And beyond, even though some of the employments are down, we still have increased revenues from the store, and we put money into the store. We've added the concepts to increase those revenues. And I, again, am a local minority business owner here in the city. I've operated in airport concessions, in different airport concessions prior to retail concessions, mainly public communications. I have contracts with the payphones, prepaid calling cards, internet kiosks, so I'm very familiar with the airport concessions business, and operated very successfully.
Was that part of your consideration about the equity partnership and that relationship as you went through the scoring process?
I mean, it wasn't a technical part of the scoring process, but in the case of Hudson, and this was the party that we recommended on this package #2, the fact that the equity partners, Ms. Cochran and Magic Johnson and others, came to the meetings, interview after interview, and, demonstrated that they had something at stake in the game did matter in terms of, the commitment to the airport.
And those who didn't get it, do they have the same kind of equity partnerships or not?
Not all of them did. Not all and we didn't set a requirement in advance
sure.
that there be equity partners who were former ACDBEs or current ACDBEs, but it did make a difference how sort of the prime, if you will, or the incumbent in this case, branched out and formed a team to represent our goals.
I see. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Also, just speaking of local, I think in HDS and even the previous areas has no local ownership on their team, equity, or in this case, the DBE partner, a friend from Atlanta.
Sir, at this time, you can all sit down. You're welcome to come back up if one of the board members decides to ask you a specific question. So, Mr. Rosendahl, did that satisfy? You had made a request specific to
Hearing
them.
their positioning on it. And I'm looking forward that to each one of these that we have an appreciation of those who were given priority in the discussions to respond back. That's all. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the board members? We're talking about protests on package 2. Mr. Martin, you interjected something a minute ago which struck me as a little interesting in interest of fairness to all the people who participated and brought forth what I would assume is their best foot forward in the oral interviews. You referred to the oral interviews, I think, about Magic Johnson showing up and perhaps some other people that they showed a big interest in, as you stated, that they have something at stake here. Were any of the other oral interviewees, did they not show a similar intensity as far as bringing, I heard that, Eva Longoria showed up and people who are celebrities, chefs showed up to their interviews, etc., things of that nature?
All the interviews were different. People were bringing in equity partners in some cases and subtenants in other cases. And to be blunt about it, some people who came in the room with their subtenants clearly had never met them before, and other people had really worked hard together to put their proposal together and knew all the parts of the business, as I would say Mr. Johnson did and Ms. Cochran. They knew what was going on with the entire business. So the interview process, who answered questions, revealed the extent to which, the participation was real and broadened. But it was different for every proposer, both on the retail and the food side.
So everybody brought it differently from your perspective?
And some were more credible than others.
Okay. Thank you. Any last chance before we move on? Board members? Okay. That being the case, we've heard the protests for package number 2. Before we go on to the final retail package is within our purview, which is package number 4. I just wanted to announce it is now going to be 3:30. We convene this meeting technically 10 o'clock. Shortly thereafter, we convene a quorum. And it appears that we should be able to reconvene next Monday. I'm going to try to get a better clarity from the budget chairman, who has a Monday afternoon standing meeting, as to how early in that day we can accommodate him.
Could we do package 4 now, too? Are we going to do 4?
Yes, we are. I just said that we're going to go to package 4.
Great.
But I wanted to apprise the board members of how soon, hopefully, we can reconvene, because once we conclude the protests on the retail packages and/or any other activity that the board chooses to engage in on the retail packages, I would like to, when we reconvene, we could go directly to the food and beverage protests at our next meeting. So that being the case, so while we're listening to the protest of package number 4, I'll try to get some clarity during that time through staff, preferably, so we can all listen, get some clarity as to which members are available next Monday, so that hopefully next Monday will be the convening of this board meeting, and we'll hopefully have enough time to convene and get through quite a bit as we have today. Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, just a procedural question. When we finish number 4, the protest, and then maybe the reaction back from those that were proposed to be selected, I then would like to make a motion to move these 3 packages forward after we do 4 and separate it from the rest of it, that is the food and beverage packages 2, 3, and 5, and save that for the next meeting.
Mr. Rosendahl, it is in order for you to make a motion at that time. It's always in order. So with that,
Great, thank you.
we now move to the process of listening to the protests on package number 4. Again, we'll give the parties who choose to come forward 5 minutes to state their protest or their concerns and their argument, and that would mean both the recommended, staff recommended prevailing party and any party who is involved in that package who is protesting or chooses to speak about this protest. So we're now on package number 4. You will have 5 minutes to make your statements. Go ahead.
Hi, Philip Tate with Shepherd Mullen, representing Host again. In package 4, we get another glimpse through the construction wall. And we saw in the comment sheets and the scoring sheets that Hudson received a very high score on their Hollywood-style concept. And the comments that were there, very few, but the ones that were there included phrases such as new to LAX. Host's very similar concept, Destination LA, which is the incumbent concept at the store and has received high praise from LAWA and the industry, received rather low scores with comments such as not new for the space. As we've seen, they didn't keep their notes. There were very few comments made, but what we can discern is that the scores seem to be tied to whether you were new to LAX or not new to LAX. That's not a criteria. It seems that the scoring panel inserted new criteria into the scoring process. It's the very little bit that we have to go on in trying to recreate how this process got to the results it got to does not line up with the results that they achieved. Staff's inability to explain to you why it is that HDS was scored so differently from Hudson on the concept exactly illustrates our point that you probably shouldn't shred your notes after you finish your scoring process. This is the problem that we have. We can't recreate the scoring, and the little bits of information that are there are inconsistent with the actual scores. To walk back through this, we've peered through the wall a number of times now. In Retail Section 1, we saw that Arias didn't provide any substantiation to you that their ACDP participants can actually perform. They've got a third of the contract, and you don't know if they can perform. It's wonderful that he stands up now and tells you that he can perform, but that wasn't what was before the scoring committee at the time that they awarded them this high score. And as the Hudson team very eloquently explained, that is part of the federal requirement, that your ACDBE cannot just be a shell. They have to actually be able to perform. You don't know if they can based on what was before the scoring panel at the time. What was in the package. On all of the packages, we've seen that LAWA awarded perfect scores on the reference criterion to companies before they had the required reference checks performed. They offer you a very convenient excuse that they use the supplemental materials that some proposers elected to submit instead of what was required of them. The requirement was 3 names and phone numbers, and they would call and check them. That someone cherry-picked some references and they scored based on that, I guess the question is, how did you score the companies that didn't submit that? Because that's the problem. They substituted scoring criteria, they substituted materials, they changed the rules as the game was being played. You're supposed to set the rules, receive the proposals, score them according to the rules. This was a moving target, and it appears that some companies favored from the moving target and others were disadvantaged. As a result, we believe that the process was tainted and needs to be restarted.
You still have time on your clock. I just want to let you know, once you concede, then the only opportunity you're going to have to speak to the board is if one of the members asks you to come forward. Okay? Thank you very much.
Respond. Can we ask them to respond? Staff first before?
Yes, okay, go ahead and sit down, we'll call you up, and allow you to come up and...
Just generally, it's very clear that this proposer does not agree with our evaluation panel. I would simply
I don't think
point
that was
out-
the question, Ms. Lindsay.
That's right. I'm not sure what was the question.
He just asked you a question.
I just want you to react to Mr. Tate's comments.
That's what I was
Yeah, okay.
trying to do. The fact is that part of what Mr. Tate asserted was that it appeared that the evaluation panel was biased toward people that had not been in the airport. The recommended proposer has been in the airport for quite a long time.
That's very good. I appreciate that. And now if we could ask them to come on up and also explain, not you, Phil, but you heard one of your opponents in protest say what they said. React to that.
Thank you. Again, what Hudson did in all 4 retail packages, Mr. Rosenthal, we didn't take a narrow view. We laid out the airport. In package 4, there was no ACDB participation. We proposed a joint venture with 16% participation. Package 4, there was no established goal. We brought forth Karim Zaman to grow his business. He was in a declining brand, pay telephones. We all use our cell phones today. We picked that entrepreneur up, got him into the retail business a year, 2 years ago, began to grow him. In package 4, we also presented Bartell's Harley, Hollywood Style, Ed Hardy, King Baby Studio, Oakley, True Religion. We really tried to look at the entire program, bring you diversity, exceed your requirements. Local was, I think I attended 3 outreach meetings, sir, where local was the objective. We could have brought national partners. We have 50 joint venture partners and relationships around the country. From Texas, New York, Atlanta, you name it, we could bring partners in here. It would have been robbery to not bring in Mr. Saman to grow his business, to not let Soto expand their business. So, again, I think our protester, in this case, host, wants to paint a broad picture in the entire process. We simply believe the process worked, and in our protest for Package 1, we said we should not forego Manuel Soto and his family for an outside firm. That's why we protest Package 1, and we stand and say we support staff in this recommendation for Package 2, 3, and 4. Counsel?
Once again, Ben Resnick before you. The RFP itself provides the following procedure. It's Section 3.5 Sub 4. Quote, the Board of Airport Commissioners will only consider protests by any proposer who appears to have a substantial and reasonable prospect of receiving an award if the protest is denied or sustained, end quote. That's built into the process. So with respect to this protest before you, again, Hudson was ranked number 1 by all 5 evaluators in the ranking. The protest is not from the number 2 ranked, it's from the last ranked person. So to award it to the protester, you'd have to leapfrog over number 2, which is not what's customarily done or normally done. Now, if you're going to move on the packages of retail, I would ask you again to very carefully look at protest number 1, where that rule is different because we were number 2, Hudson was number 2, and we were razor thin close. So if the protest to Hudson is granted, Hudson does get awarded retail package 1. With respect to this notion of local, it is not just a scoring item. In your scoring sheet, as the chair correctly points out before, you look at the categories of scoring. But if you read the beginning of the RFP, it sets out global goals. What are the goals? And the goals set forth in the RFP clearly state bring local participation. Bring local partners. Why? Because we want the monies to stay in LA and not be transported somewhere to Europe or to Atlanta. Do we want the work not done here in LA with businesses that will thrive here. That was a goal in the RFP, not just a scoring category. So if you're going to move today on the retail packages, I strongly request and urge this committee, because this is the only place where changes can be made on the recommendations. Once it leaves this body, the City Council has no power to change the awards. It must either vote up or down the package as a whole. And so this is the first opportunity that we have to have our protest heard in full.
And then also, in our last 45 seconds, execution in this business is very important. That's why the experience piece. And I believe, as we look at the various protests today, the experience of executing a program of this size, and I think a comment was made that even in Package 1, Arius is being recommended for, I think, 3 of the 5 food packages. I believe in North America, their greatest experience is in food. Their only experience, which of course in Atlanta, their joint venture partner, in this case, operates the news and gift store. So I don't think Arius, in terms of North America, operates any news and gift stores in North America. Their 5 airports are all food.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Has a question? Then you, Mr. Romero.
Since we just got this, I mean, is that basically what the basis is of your protest and your assertion that on Package 1, it should be awarded to Hudson? I mean, is there anything else you can give us? I mean, because obviously there's no way we've made it through this. What's the basis of that assertion, that in fact on Package 1, it should indeed be awarded to Hudson and not Arius?
Yes, Councilwoman Hahn, the answer to that is our basic premise, if you wanted to distill it down to 2 points.
Yeah.
One is the fact that experience in operation was a major category of the scoring, and experience in operation, you have a choice between a company that on the food is a very successfully large company, that's Arius, but on the news and gift in U.S. airports has maybe 15 locations they've conceded to, and they've operated them in the last 2 years. Compare that to Hudson, which has over 500 news and gift locations in the United States alone, more worldwide. That's one main premise, because you do need the ability to execute.
And then let me touch on.
So are you claiming that the perfect score under experience and qualification might be a little off?
The perfect score that was given to Arius, I think, was off in the sense that they looked at Arius as a big corporate conglomerate that can run a lot of businesses, and we don't deny that. But what we're saying is they do that in the food side. On the retail side, if you look at what they do on retail, it's not in airports. It's at turnpikes, it's at other kinds of facilities. But when it comes to airports and news and gift retail, Hudson is the leader, and Arius does not have that experience.
And Councilwoman Hahn, again, when you travel the country, we put our name, Hudson News, on our stores. It's our core business. It is not secondary to what we do. It is everything that we do. We don't put other names. Because you asked for local diversity, we went out and partnered with local iconic names. But our core business as a company is news and gift. Mike?
And Councilwoman, you asked about the letter that was just handed out. For specific point of clarity.
The novel.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Mike Mullaney with Hudson Group. I'm the Executive Vice President. That letter is a follow-up of information on public statements that were made at this last Board of Referred Powers meeting, and some written correspondence that was provided to this board, wherein Arius made public statements and representations that they had increased sales at Arius over our former store. When we actually received the information from the Atlanta International Hartsfield Airport about the actual sales, their sales are substantially less than when we were there. So I think the information was a bit misleading at best. And overall, again, we're trying to clarify that Arius USA has 5 news and gift operations in 1 airport in the U.S. They sublease the majority of those locations, and none of their partners here before you today have operations at Atlanta.
And Councilwoman Hahn, when you look at that package that's thick, I think it speaks to the increased that has taken place in Hartsville has taken place on the food side of the store they took over. The actual store that we operate was a book cafe, and I think at the end of the day, when you look at the actual data from Atlanta, they increased the food component and they're selling less books. So again, to make the public statement was not totally accurate, but it does speak to their strength of food and beverage company.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I'd like to do, because I know that Aris would like to respond, but I'd like to put a motion before us, colleagues, if it works. I move to dismiss the protests and conflict of interest claims for retail packages 1, 2, and 4, and I further move that we approve retail packages 1, 2, and 4 as they have been presented to us by LAWA. Do I have a second?
I'll second, but I'd like to vote on each individual package.
Sure. Good.
So there's been a motion and a second, and it will come to a vote that the packages be voted on separately. Is that your?
Yes.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Accepted
if we could,
as
that'd be
your
great,
motion?
that'd be fine. If we could let Aris, that was pretty well slammed around, to at least respond to that package number 1 that they represent.
We're in discussion at this time. As I mentioned earlier, a board member can call somebody forward to clarify. Please state your name for the record, and I do have some questions for staff as well, based on some of the statements that were made.
Jeff McConnell from Arnie Burkhoff and Associates, representing Arias. Arias would have had a local DBE partner here in their Package 1 retail. They had planned to partner with Cruise of California, a current concessionaire at LAX. Unfortunately, Hudson threatened to sue them if they participated with us. This is apparently retribution for a past problem that Hudson had, where they tried to dispose of all of their DBE concessionaires when they bought this concession at LAX. They didn't win it, they bought it from W.H. Smith. In fact, experience means not just how long you've been there, but how well you do the job. The airport is very familiar with how well Hudson's doing the job with News and Gift. They wanted to change, they selected Arias. It's time to reaffirm that selection. Thank you.
Thank you. As you've been asked to speak, I also have some questions. Mr. Rosendahl, you want to continue? You
I
have the
just
floor.
wanted to know, has staff heard that there was this threatening situation there? Is there any comment? I'm hearing it for the first time. What do we know?
I was unaware of that.
I was unaware of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. A lot of things have been said. This is not a court of law. People want to go around suing each other. That's your business. But right here, we're going to try. We're going to try our best to just focus on a process.
Right, okay.
No, unless you get called up by one of the board members,
Okay,
and I'm
why
not.
don't you come up and at least say for the record that you think, what you just said? Quickly.
Yeah, Ben Resnick. Quickly, the gentleman's last comment, I just want to emphatically deny that. But I want to point out more importantly to you, if that is the reason they refused to hire minority local people, then it's shame on them. The fact is, Hudson did not threaten them, and that is a sad excuse for not having an ACDB on their team.
Are you
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have some questions for the staff. I did read a lot of these documents as much as I could and reviewed some of them as well. This question is for Gina Marie Lindsay. Apparently, there is language that was put forth and made public to everybody who cared to engage or know about this RFP process at LAX. And one of those things that was put into the language of awareness to everyone is that when it came to protests, the only protests that LAWA would be willing to recognize and entertain are protests that could result in the protester actually being moved forward to actually potentially get the business on that protest. Is that the case?
That's pretty standard for the airport. I do not know whether it was actually in the RFP. Okay, it was actually in the RFP.
I read it.
Okay?
Okay, so while I'm asking these questions, if one of the attorneys can actually find that clause, because I'm going to want you to read it when you're ready. You ready?
You want me to read it?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
That way I'm not the only one that heard it, and sometimes I read things, and when I hear it the second time, I say, well, it's a little different. Maybe I understood it wrong the first time. and the second or third time, because I've read it several times.
I'm reading from the footnote 9 in the city attorney letter dated June 10 states, Host was among the lowest ranked proposers and frequently the lowest in each package on which it proposed. The RFP state, the board will only consider protests by any proposers who appear to have a substantial and reasonable prospect of receiving an award if the protest is denied or sustained. That's quoted from RFP section 3.5, paren 5, page 6.
Okay, so basically, it was a statement of fact that as far as LAWA was concerned, if a protest was made, it could only be made by a proposer that actually had a chance of actually making a difference for them, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as we look at retail and food concessions, what was the ranking of Host, since they've been pointed out in this deliberation that they just didn't stand a chance, and why are they even bothering to protest? As a matter of fact, as was just read by our city attorney here, that in fact their protests may not have merit because they can't move up the ranks.
Councilman, it may be beneficial if I just continue reading from this footnote because it does address that question.
Excellent.
It quotes from the language, and then it goes on to say, Host's allegations that the entire process was biased and should be completely invalidated can properly be considered by the board. As Host does not have a substantial and reasonable prospect of receiving an award, its other allegations need not be considered and can properly be disregarded by the board. However, all of Host's allegations are addressed either in this letter or the chart so that the board may have a complete understanding of the facts, the legal context, and LAWA's response. Then there's the layer of the discretion over top of that people address.
That is that this is a policy that was included in the RFP, but it's not one that precludes the board, should you choose to do so, from considering any protests that are brought to you.
Okay, but
that too is in keeping with the right to petition your local government.
But that was read from the section that speaks specifically to protests, correct?
Correct.
That was not read from the RFP itself, or help me understand, attorneys, they're one document when you get it all together, or they are in fact two documents? The document that specifically speaks to the protest,
I'm sorry,
and the document of the RFP.
The quotation is a passage in the RFP.
Okay. Now, because what I'm looking at as much as anything in any of these deliberations is the process. I'm not stuck on who's a sub or what have you, but I keep thinking of the process. And it appears that when you look at all the packages, looking at the retail packages, in package number 1, there were, and I'll qualify it as saying that there were finally 5 qualified proposers who actually got scored and ranked. Maybe there were more proposers, but the ones that we had before us, there's 5 in package number 1 retail. In 5th place was Host, which would seem that why would they, if they read that clause, they really shouldn't even bother protesting, because they'd have to throw all the other 4 out before they would be able to move up the ranks to say, hey, they're going to be the proposed winner, be it recommended by staff, or this board override the staff and say they're going to win. Package 1. Package 2, again, there are 5 qualified proposers who got ranked, and they ranked last there as well. Again, why should they even bother to protest if that clause is going to be adhered to? It doesn't appear that they were a qualified proposer in package 3 retail. It appears that they were a qualified proposer in package 4 retail. Again, 3 proposers, they came in dead last. So why would they bother to protest? They're not even in 2nd place. They knock out the 1st place, at least they got a shot. Maybe the argument can be made that it should be them. In that case, not. They do not appear in package 5 retail. But when we go over to food concessions, package number 1, it appears that we had 4 qualified proposers who actually got ranked. Again, they came in dead last, 4th out of 4. In package 2 food, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 qualified proposers who actually got ranked. They came in not last, but second to last or 3rd out of the 4. So again, why could they or should they bother to protest? In package 3, in food concessions, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 proposers who actually got ranked. Again, they came in dead last, 5th out of 5. So again, why would they bother to protest? On package 4 food, there were 1, 2, 3, 4 proposers, and they came in 3rd out of 4th. Again, why would they bother to protest based on that clause? And on package 5, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, apparently 7 qualified proposers, and they came in 1, 2, 3, 4th. They didn't even come in the upper 50 percentiles on those rankings. So, again, why would host even bother to protest based on that clause? So, but as it was clarified, I think, by Mr. Echeverria, that clause, you're saying, Mr. Echeverria, does not preclude proposers from protesting, even though it appears that it is extremely and highly unlikely that they could move up the ranks enough to actually be the winning bidder?
Correct.
Okay, so that clause is a rule of thumb? What is it?
It's a policy.
It doesn't preclude protesters from protesting. It allows the board, if it so desires, to not consider those protests.
Okay, so if the board desired not to consider those protests, then there's definitely one company that, if we desired to, they definitely wouldn't stand a chance of having their protests heard by this board if we chose to adhere to that clause. Correct?
Correct.
Based on what I pointed out, come on, they weren't in second place in any bid. They weren't. I think if they were in 3rd, it was because there was only 3 or 4. So my point is, it appears that somehow, some way, host really, really brought their worst stuff to this entire process of which they chose to engage. It appears, at least on 9 out of 10, 90% of the proposals, they chose to engage. And it appears that they just really blew it. They really didn't bring their best stuff. Mr. Martin, you were on the evaluation team. Now I'm going to ask you a broad question. What happened with host? As far as you were there on every evaluation. Excuse me, let me ask you a question first. Are you familiar with host at all outside of this process, this retail food and beverage process?
Oh, yes.
You are familiar with them?
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about them?
They're one of the biggest, strongest national operators of mostly food, but also retail at airports. Mm-hmm. So they're a national and international company. It's a big company.
Yep. I know some guys who are really big, but if they wanted to play football, they wouldn't be very good. So now I'm going to ask you a second question. Do you have an opinion about host when it comes to whether or not they're very good?
Not strongly held one way or the other. I think they're a good operator. I'll tell you, the range of performance is different. It's variable. Even at LAX, you see different levels of performance in different outlets. And so, based on experience here, the results are mixed.
But the results of their performance on this RFP process is not mixed. It's definitely in the lower 50 percentile at best, and usually in the 75, lower 25th percentile, or perhaps even dead last on most occasions.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was reading this right as far as what I'm looking at. Any other questions from any of the members? We do have a motion before us, and it was, the motion was modified by Councilmember Parks and accepted by the maker of the motion, seconded by Mr. Parks. And the motion that before us is to vote on the retail concession packages 1, 2, and 4, and that the vote should take place as separate votes on each package. before we vote, since we're in the process of discussion at this time, I do not feel prepared to vote on these packages at this time because today we spent most of our time following our legal responsibilities of hearing the protest, yet at the same time, we haven't gone through very long deliberations on the retail packages when it comes to, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this meeting, the other half of our responsibilities, which is the non-legal aspects, but the actual process and what exactly took place and where we stand with these particular proposals. So that being the case, we still have a motion before us, and so therefore, we will, I'm sorry I can't see everybody clearly by a show of hands. If you would, please, members of the board. And we're still in discussion. Did you want to say something before a vote?
I want to see if Mr. Rosenthal would accept just a minor friendly amendment that you commented on accepting the protest, the letter regarding protest, but I'd also like to add the letter regarding the conflict of interest should also be added to that regarding these three packages, that we approve those letters on those two regards before we vote on each package.
Yes. As pertaining to the retail packages.
The retail packages.
Okay. All right. That being the case,
I said that he asked that we accept the recommendations of the city attorney regarding the protest letter. I just asked that we also accept the conflict of interest issues from the city attorney's second letter as it relates to these packages before we vote on the three packages.
I think for purposes of the record, you also want to move the board reports with the board report and all the findings contained in the board report, in the staff report, I'm sorry, what we call the board report, the airport, but the staff report that the airport forwarded to you in your capacity as the board of referred powers. And there's several findings in there that are necessary for the legal.
Yes, that's fine with me.
okay, so that's what you move?
Yes.
Along with that clarification from Councilmember Parks pertaining to not only the reports of the staff, but also the attorney letters pertaining to retail packages, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. That being the case, we have an opportunity to vote before us. So with that, those in favor, raise your hand by signifying aye. If as this motion was stated, to accept staff recommendations on packages 1, 2, and 4 of the retail packages, along with the clarifications by Councilmember Parks.
But
we're going to vote on them, package 1, package 2, and package 4 on 3 separate votes. Okay? So we are now on package 1 for a vote. All those in favor of, as stated, raise your hand. That's 2.
My concern is that I do not support that as number 1. I think the case made by Hudson as being the most qualified and also having local ownership is one that I think is overwhelmingly important. So I make a substitute that the Hudson Magic Johnson proposal for 1 be substituted for the board report.
Okay. That being the case, we have a substitute motion on package number 1. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hahn. So, yes. No, I'm sorry. I thought it was the city attorney speaking. No, you may not. I'm sorry. So we now have a vote before us on the substitute motion. City attorney, we were in the middle of a vote, and a substitute motion was made. We go to that next?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that being the case, we are now on the substitute motion that it be Hudson Magic Johnson Enterprise and Concourse Ventures, that they be the concession that is awarded. And so that being the case, again, we're going to vote by a show of hands. Those in favor, raise your hand. We have 3 hands raised, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Parks, Mr. Reyes. So therefore, that is a majority to vote. However, I give it the opportunity for the other members to vote by raising of your hands. Those who are opposed. Okay, we have 1 member Voting opposed, myself, Chairman Cardenas. So that moves forward to the council,
Mr.
correct?
Rosendahl raised his hand in opposition also.
I'm sorry, what?
Mr. Rosendahl did raise his hand with
Oh, I'm
you
sorry,
in
I couldn't see
opposition.
you.
I know, you weren't looking. But what I'd
Excuse me,
rather...
Mr. Rosendahl, I
Yeah.
did look, there's a monitor between us. Next time, all members, can you please raise your hand higher than your head? Okay.
I say go like this.
Hold on, I'm in the middle of announcing the vote.
Well, because to cause not an issue, I mean, I'm more than willing to appreciate what Mr. Parks said.
But
if it moves
look,
forward.
Mr. Rosendahl, you can speak after I announce the vote. I was in the middle of announcing the vote. I apologize for not seeing your hand. So that prevails on a 3-2 vote, correct, Mr. Rosendahl? You were 4. I'm sorry.
The point is that I wanted a discussion with Mr. Parks about that because I actually think Hudson does a great job too, but my goal is to move forward as best as we can.
Mr. Rosendahl, okay, so that vote moves, that motion, substitute motion moves forward on a 4-1 vote.
Okay.
Okay? Mr. Rosendahl being an aye vote. Cardenas being a no vote, just for clarification. Okay, we now go to package number 2. We have package number 2 before us. As was stated, the staff recommendations by the city attorney is what we're ratifying here, which the staff recommendation was LAX Retail Magic to JV as listed here on package number 2. Those in favor, raise your hand clearly. Those in favor on package number 2 as staff recommended. Above your head, please. Thank you so much. That's 4 votes in favor. Those who choose to vote no, I vote no, Cardenas, so that moves forward on a 4-1 vote. Next, we have package 4. Again, the staff recommendation, along with the clarifications that Mr. Parks had clarified in the motion as well. We are now on package number 4. All those in favor, raise your hand by signifying aye.
Aye.
We have 4 hands raised. Okay, now those who are not in favor or voting no, that's myself, Chairman Cardenas, no. So that moves forward on a 4-1 vote. Okay? Thank you. As was mentioned earlier, I'm hoping that staff got some clarification. It is our objective to announce formally, not at this moment, but our intention is to have a meeting next Monday, September 20th. Earlier in the meeting, I mentioned that it is our intention to commence at 10 a.m., seeing more than one conflict from the 5 members on the board.
Yeah, well, I'm going to apply that.
Her and who else?
Parks is able to... Yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back.
All right, okay. All right, so we are, thank you, staff, for your diligent work.
Mr. Cardenas, if I may.
Yes.
Is it the will of the committee of the board that the retail portion go separately to council, or it's being held in board?
We'll hold it in committee.
I'm sorry,
and move them together.
do you wish it to be processed back to the LAWA staff at this time, or held until you resolve the food and beverage portion?
We'll hold it until we resolve the food and beverage. Again, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting to hopefully have these deliberations done not this week, but the subsequent week. And I'm about to announce our next meeting. Our next meeting can be at 2 p.m. Okay. At 2 p.m. next Monday, September 20th. It's also our intent to convene a meeting at, I'll ask you a question, Mr. Rosendahl. You have committee on Wednesday, the 22nd, is it?
Correct.
Okay.
4 o'clock would work.
4 o'clock would work? Okay. All right. We will convene this meeting. It is our intent to subsequently, if necessary, convene the meeting, to convene this board on Wednesday, September 22nd at 4 p.m. And then, if necessary, we will convene on Thursday, September 23rd at 1 p.m. And then, if necessary, we'll convene again on September 24th at 1 p.m.
Yeah. The one thing I want to make sure, Mr. Chair, is I would like to move forward today in the 3 that we voted to go to full council forthwith and get that over with now.
We won't have council, but one...
It doesn't go to council, sir.
One day tomorrow.
And it won't appear on the
Go to
council
council.
agenda tomorrow.
Can we lock it in for next Tuesday?
It is possible, but yes.
Actually, the packages got sent back to LAWA, and then LAWA has 60 days
to package it to council?
Within, or council has 60
Does it go to
days
council first?
thereafter within which to approve or reject
Doesn't it go
it.
to council first? What we...
Or does it go directly from us to...
Hold on, let's hear from the city attorney.
It goes to LAWA, and then LAWA sends it back to the clerk.
Okay.
Just because of this
Council?
unusual board preferred powers mechanism.
Doesn't go to council.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't go to council.
Eventually,
Okay.
yes.
Eventually it does?
First to LAWA.
First of all.
First to law. As we approved.
What's the timeline?
I'd have to defer to our LAWA attorneys.
The board secretary, I believe, of the airport commission is,
I'm sorry, speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry, this is somewhat, we're trying to sort it through, but the board secretary is the one who transmits it to the city council, the board of airport commissioners secretary. We believe.
But the amount of time that they have to do so, not that they will take up the whole period of time, but the city attorney had mentioned there was an element of time in which they have to do so.
There's the 60 days that were referred to were the time for council to act once it receives the transmittal. There is no specific time specified. I understand, at least at this point, that there's a motion to move it forthwith, but the board could also instruct that the clerk or the board secretary that you wish to wait until it's one package and transmit the whole thing as one package. It's up to the board to give that instruction.
Yes, we have, Councilmember Rosendahl, you expressed your wish to send it forthwith, in this case to LAWA. As chairman of this committee, and only one vote on this committee, I prefer that we send the packages together. As I mentioned, it appears that with the cooperation of all the members of this committee, we will be convening at various opportunities next week, perhaps even be done by next Friday. As was pointed out, we do not have any council meetings other than tomorrow between now and next Tuesday. So perhaps we might be losing out on a few days if we keep them together in committee. But again, it's the will of the body. So Mr. Rosendahl, if you would like to proceed with that, then I would recommend that you make a motion and then see if you get a second, and then we can vote as to whether or not we move it forthwith.
Okay.
I think it's in our interest to have a package.
Pardon me?
I think it's in our interest to have a package.
Why?
So that it all deals with airport issues and concessions.
Well, I'll go with your sage advice then, but as long as it's clear we voted the way we did.
Absolutely, there's no
and that's
question.
the way it goes.
Moving it forthwith does not remove any
Sure.
of the matters of this committee.
Airport forthwith.
Yeah, okay.
We should finish this up.
Yeah, forthwith to the airport, but the package comes back as a package. That's fine.
Okay. All right, so we did not have a motion and a second, so we will continue to move forward. So at this time, that concludes the deliberations that we're taking on these matters today in this board meeting. And with that, it is our intention to reconvene next Monday, September 20th at 2 p.m. in these council chambers. And please look forward to that formal notice. Now with that, this board meeting is now adjourned.
Good idea.
Earthquakes are like hurricanes. They're so powerful and can be so deadly. Look, we have an email from Jacob and RJ. They say Dr. D told them about how to use PNS waves to find the center of an earthquake.
Dr. D says you must have 3 seismic stations to locate the epicenter.
We have 2. Maybe that's enough. I doubt it, but I have an idea. Let's write the Sci-Fi's Kids Club and ask them if they know how to use SMP waves to map an epicenter. Hey, we have a response from Roberts Park Elementary School in Norfolk, Virginia. Hi, we're from Mr. Darrell Ransom's 3rd grade class at Roberts Park Elementary School in Norfolk, Virginia.
Hi, we're the Treehouse Detectives, and we see you're doing an activity to find out where an earthquake occurred. Could you tell us something about it?
Sure. Our mentors from the Society of Women Engineers helped us with the activity called triangulation. It must have something to do with threes. Yes, we learned that in order to find the origin